Good evening, everybody. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. We do have one addition to the agenda. We will be having a closed session related to threatened and pending litigation at the end of the agenda this evening, so look forward to that, I'm sure. Next item, we have a roll call. I'll ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mr. Tassoni?
Present.
Mr. Webster?
Here.
Mr. Westcott?
Present.
Mr. Arena?
Here.
Mr. Billich? Mr. Boomer?
Here.
Mr. Booker?
Present.
Mr. Butita?
Here.
Mrs. Crosby?
Here.
Mr. Fellers?
Here.
Mr. Fiducia?
Here.
Mr. Gurl?
Present.
Mrs. Gorl?
Present.
Mr. Hoffman?
Present.
Mr. Kelly? Mr. McDonald?
Present.
Mr. Neighbors?
Present.
Mrs. Red?
Present.
Mr. Salgado?
Present.
Mr. Schultz?
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we have 2 absent. 18, Mr. Kelly?
Here.
Just 1 absent.
19 present, 1 absent. Thank you very much, Clerk Gamow. Our next item of business is our prayer and invocation and pledge. I'm going to turn things over to Mr. Arena. Mr. Arena, please stand.
Lord, we are gathered here today to serve the people of Winnebago County. Unite us so we may move forward with a shared purpose. Guide our hearts and our minds to act in a spirit of fairness with respect for different points of view. Lord, we give thanks to the men and women who do the work of our government. They have dedicated themselves to serve our community. And we pray that you watch over our first responders. Keep them safe as they work to protect the lives of others. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm going to ask Deborah Olson to please come on up, and I believe Dr. Martell from our health department is going to come on up and help us with this presentation related to the radon contest winner.
Good evening. While beautiful, the geology in Winnebago County increases the risk for high levels of radon gas in homes in our community. Radon is an odorless gas that can build up in homes and cause long-term exposure to high radon levels can lead to lung cancer. Testing is the only way to know if your home has high radon levels. That is why it's important for all homes in our community to be tested for radon. To encourage residents in Winnebago County to test their homes for radon gas, we sponsored a contest at the Health Department that started on February 12th. Residents who purchased a test kit at the Winnebago County Health Department and received their test results by April 15th in the month of public health were entered to win a radon system if their test results indicated that their homes had high radon gas levels. A radon system will help to disperse the levels of radon gas in the home and help to mitigate and prevent lung cancer causing. We are pleased to announce that Deborah Olson from Loves Park has won the radon testing contest. Congratulations, Deborah.
Thank you.
So on behalf of the Winnebago County Board and the Health Department, we would like to present her with a voucher for a mitigation system that she can then help to prevent radon gas in her home.
Take a quick picture here.
All right.
Here, you get in the middle. You get
God.
there. There.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
And one of the reasons we did a contest this year was to increase the number of people who test for radon in their homes. We know that the cost of the mitigation systems is cost prohibitive for many of our residents to attempt to even know what the results are. So we appreciate Deborah's commitment and her willingness to come forward and step up to be kind of a spokesperson over the next year about radon and how the process went for her. So thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Martell. Our next item of business, we have a proclamation in recognition of World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, building strong support for elders. And I'm going to ask our state's attorney, Marilyn Harry Ross, to come on up and accept this on behalf of the Family Violence Coordinating Council. Whereas older adults deserve to be treated with respect and dignity to enable them to serve as leaders, mentors, volunteers, and vital participating members of our community. And whereas in 2006, the International Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, in support of the United Nations International Plan of Action, proclaimed a day to recognize the significance of elder abuse as a public health and human rights issue. Whereas 2019 marks the 13th annual World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, its recognition will promote a better understanding of abuse and neglect of older adults. Whereas, where there is justice, there can be no abuse. Therefore, NCAA urges all people to restore justice by honoring older adults. Whereas, join us in engaging and empowering movement and putting an end to abuse. Now, therefore, I, Frank Haney, Chairman of the Winnebago County Board, do hereby proclaim June 15th, 2019, World Elder Abuse Awareness Day in Winnebago County, and encourage all counties to recognize and celebrate our older adults and their ongoing contributions to the vitality of our community. And again, I want to thank the state's attorney for accepting this on behalf of the Family Violence Coordinating Council. So if we could give them a hand, please.
On behalf of the Family Violence Coordinating Council, I want to thank Chairman Haney for recognizing our seniors, some of our most valuable citizens in the community. We want to make sure that we continue to protect them from abuse and to educate individuals to recognize the abuse when they see it. So thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Winnebago County.
Thank you, State's Attorney Harry Ross. Our next item of business is a presentation related to the trustee agent program. And I'm going to ask Michael Dunn Jr., the Executive Director of the Region 1 Planning Council, and I believe Eric Setter from R1 to also come up here. They have a presentation on the recommendation that I'll be making regarding the trustee program. And this is an overview. There is no action item on the agenda tonight. This is a preview of the program and the solution. Mr. Dunn.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for having us here tonight. It's a beautiful day outside to be here, so appreciate it. On the first slide, I'll try to be brief. I've come across and come to this board many times to explain what the Regional Planning Council is and what it isn't. I'm happy to further answer any questions to clarify the governance and operations of our organization, but this is a slide we often use in introductions to explain that the Regional Planning Council is a organization where all staff is located, all governance is vested, and it oversees a number of federal functions and funds. One being the what used to be called RMAP or RATS, the MPO. One being the Economic Development District, which Winnebago is a 1/3 member of, with Boone and McHenry County. That is an organization that reports federally to the U.S. Department of Commerce. The Land Bank, that a number of local organizations entered into an IGA for, as well as WinGIS, which used to be housed here at the county, is now, it still is a multi-jurisdictional organization, but the staff of WinGIS are now RPC employees, physically located at the RPC. The RMAP, the Economic Development District, they have no staff. All staff is RPC staff, including the Land Bank. Our territory, as you can see there, as an economic development district, it's hashed out in Winnebago, Boone, and McHenry. The MPO, which is the Federal Transportation Planning Organization for our area, is the gray area, which goes into Boone, Winnebago, and Ogle. The area for the MPO is defined by the U.S. Census every 10 years, as the federal government determines what our urbanized area is, and based on that, sets what the board for the MPO is and what the funding level is. The EDA, or the EDD, is determined by each county, determining whether they want to participate in that economic development district or not. However, the Regional Planning Council, again, that kind of is the umbrella organization to all of this, that organization has membership from Stevenson County, from Ogle County, soon DeKalb County. That is not determined by federal jurisdiction or a county government. Members of the Regional Planning Council come in at their own will, at no cost, to participate at our regional table to help all the elected leaders region-wide set the legislative agenda and set the infrastructure and planning priorities for the region. There's been some confusion out there regarding the land bank and the land bank's relationship to a county trustee program. As you are all aware, you serve per Illinois state statute as the trustee to the county trust where delinquent properties are held to the benefit of all the county beneficiaries, municipal and non-municipal, that are owed taxes on those properties. Nothing will ever change the fact that any decision regarding the trust as trustee and actions or financial decisions made on behalf of the beneficiaries of the trust are vested within your vote. The trustee will always be Winnebago County. That's state statute. The decision that we're here to discuss is who operates as the trustee's agent. As far as the land bank's concerned, the land bank's goal is to acquire properties that are of key strategic interest to its partners, whether it's a city, a county, a nonprofit, and to acquire that property before it becomes too dilapidated, too neglected, too abandoned. And typically, when I say key strategic interest, that means that there is an end user or end purpose for that parcel in mind. It might be contiguous with a campus that needs to be supported. It might be of key strategic interest to a county or city comprehensive land plan. The land bank's goal is to go in and acquire a property before it would ever even go into the county trust. That land bank function is governed by all of your land bank appointee, as well as the other municipalities and counties' land bank appointee. The funds for the land bank are separated. They're not commingled with anything. And that land bank board will make acquisition and disposal decisions and funding priority decisions on your behalf and on all the other members' behalf for those properties. In our proposal that we submitted to the county regarding the trustee program and how we would operate as agent, we looked at all the potential costs for the trustee program that would need to be assumed by the county, not by the agent, but by the county, determining what those costs might be. And then after netting those costs out, saying that 67% of all proceeds would go back to the beneficiaries of the trust. That includes the county, but also the non-municipal jurisdictions and the municipal jurisdictions. And then 33% would go for just capital acquisition, not operations, of the land bank. And by doing that, our goal is to increase the amount of properties leaving the trust and having more of those properties go back into private sector hands, while slowing down, by investing in the land bank, slowing down the amount of properties going into trust, and taking the properties that are of strategic interest away from getting into the cycle of the trustee and delinquent property tax program. Further, as it was set up under the old agency with Mr. Ballinger, Mr. Ballinger held on to all fees and interest from tax redemptions. None of those were provided to the beneficiaries, only the principal. In our proposal, we suggest that those fees and interests that are seen on redemptions are part of the gross and part of the net of what is eventually distributed 67% to the beneficiaries, 33% to the land bank. I think I already hit on this. I always get ahead of my PowerPoints, but again, to stress that the county trustee is always the county board. It is not the land bank board. It is not the RPC staff. As RPC staff, we have a dual reporting function depending on what fund we are working with and what set of properties we're working with. As RPC staff, if we're asked to operate with land bank funding under a land bank direction, we report to the land bank board. As RPC staff, if we are working on behalf of the county trustee, we are coming to you as or your representatives for decisions on how to conduct our operations in the trust, or depending on the IGA. In our proposal, we believe that an online, routine, ongoing online and physical sales process is in the best interest of the county, rather than depending on an annual auction. We believe that if the county board chooses, and it's up to the county board, that the county board could put loose and basic qualifications or a qualification process that qualifies potential bidders or buyers of trustee property. Three, we believe, and we have been encouraged by our municipal partners at the Regional Planning Council, that some sort of maintenance component should be included in what is determined as a trustee program cost. We know legal costs need to be included. We know property management costs outside of the maintenance function need to be included. But we believe that in order to preserve whatever residual value there is in properties held in trust and to try to make them more attractive to higher auction prices, it is in everybody's best interest to try to maintain them to a minimum standard, and it is unfair for municipalities to take that burden on at 100%. So whatever degree that is, we believe there should be a maintenance reimbursement component in whatever the eventual agency is. Fourth, as I hit on multiple times, we think a portion of the proceeds should not be paid to the beneficiaries, but rather on the beneficiary's behalf be used as capital infusion to the land bank for, again, only acquisitions in Winnebago County. They would be restricted for acquisitions within Winnebago County, and that would again help dilute, or not dilute, but decrease the amount of properties that are exponentially held in our trust compared to other counties. Last, I already hit on it, that we believe interest and redemptions from tax redemptions, interest and fees from tax redemptions should be distributed to the beneficiaries and cover some of the maintenance costs rather than the agent holding on to all of them. This is a flow chart that we're happy to distribute. It's hard to read, probably from your vantage point, but with that, I'm happy to move on and answer any questions or meet with any of you individually or as a group offline.
Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. You are talking about distributing a portion of the redemption dollars to the land bank?
Mr. Arena, what we're saying is that traditionally, not principal always goes 100% back to the beneficiaries, back to the taxing district. But in the past, fees and interest on redemptions off the principal have been 100% held by the agent to cover their cost or operation. Our proposal says that the fees and interest that are generated off tax redemptions should be combined with any sales proceeds from auctions or online sales, and that should all be grossed together. And from that gross, a legal cost, any property management cost, potential maintenance cost would be deducted, and then from that net, 67% of proceeds that remain in that year should go towards first, before the 33%, any money that is owed to the fund needs to be paid back. And then after that, 67% should be distributed to the tax codes of every taxing district. And then 33%, that's our proposal. We're open to an alternative. 33% should be invested into our regional land bank to try to take some of these properties before they get stuck in the cycle.
Right. So my concern was the principal and making clear that we're not touching that.
Yes,
and
sir.
then also, in my conversation with Harlem Township, they weren't aware of any of this. And now I recognize that the dollars for the sales are much less than the dollars for redemptions. And so they may feel more comfortable with that, but I would suggest that you have a conversation with some of those other taxing districts about what's happening here, because in the past, those proceeds from the sales were distributed to the taxing districts. And so the question is, if it's in an area that doesn't, is the land bank going to be reinvesting in all areas or just certain areas?
Sure. Well, two responses to that is, first, thank you, and we're happy to sit down with Harlem Township, and we definitely depend on the county board to help connect us to other taxing districts outside of the municipal vein, and so thank you for that. Two, the land bank under the county's trustee of the land bank can invest in any areas of Winnebago County outside of the municipalities that have joined the land bank. So any unincorporated area or any village that isn't already in the land bank absolutely is an appropriate geography for the land bank to invest in through the Boone or Winnebago or Stevenson County member.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
I think Mr. Arena brings up a good point, because we just met on this an hour or so ago, and that was a very important topic of discussion. Thanks for bringing that up. Any other follow-ups from Mr. Dunn for the R1PC, Mr. Sutter, related to the trustee program? Yes, sir. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to pass along, I spoke with Mayor Jerry from Loves Park. He sent a letter in support. I know the Village of McChesney Park is in support, so Mr. Dunn, you speak of other municipalities that you've already talked to and that are okay with. Can you run down a quick list of other municipalities that you've spoke with that indicate that they're okay with this?
Sure. So as I've disclosed to the board last time we were here talking about the land bank and offline, the mayors of the Regional Planning Council, South Beloit, McChesney Park, Loves Park, City of Rockford, and Cherry Valley through their legal counsel approached us asking us if we could help lend an alternative opinion to the current, at that time, under Mr. Ballinger, trustee operations. And so we shared with them information we learned from Cook County and information that was being distributed statewide on approaches to dealing with our unique problems here in Winnebago County. Those are the municipalities that we shared that information with per their request, and they were the ones that encouraged us as we were moving the land bank forward to think about what that might look like.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Any follow-up? Mr. Gurl.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to thank Mr. Dunn, Mr. Sutter, and his team for all the work that they have done on this. This is by far one of the larger items that we will overview and make decisions on here in the near future or before this. So I would really hope that everyone who has questions is not familiar with this program to ask those questions. We will try to coordinate any kind of arrangement that we can as far as presentations go to educate you and inform you on this so that we're all making the best decision possible. So I just want to say thank you for your staff, Mr. Dunn and Mr. Sutter, for the work that you've done on this, and I'm really eager to move this forward and actually put this in place. I think this is great for the whole county as a whole. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gurl. Follow-up by Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on another topic that we've discussed, and I'm unclear now on what your intention are, taking deed to all the properties. I know you had said before that you were not intending to take deed on all the properties. Is that still the case?
Thank you. Mr. Arena, I think that everything is open for further discussion. We've sent a proposed IGA that, an IGA is only good when two parties agree to it. And so we want to hear more from the county on what their expectations. It's your program. We're simply the agent. You're the client. And so in regards to the approach towards deed, so there are taxing districts out there, more discussion is needed, that receive specific funds from the trustee sale that might not be in that 67-33% pot. There's a lot of nuance to a lot of these mechanisms if we change the funding structure. With understanding that nuance, we need to make sure, because again, it's not our financial wherewithal, it is the county's, we need to make sure that we never put the county in a perilous financial situation. So working with the county, we would like to analyze all the properties out there that need to go to deed, understand the kind of inflows and outflows of cash, especially in those circumstances where a taxing district that might not be municipal is entitled to certain dollars that fall outside that 67%. And we want to be very careful that we don't run the program in a deficient way as Winnebago County has shared with us it has been run in the past. So with that said, my proposal, and I'd maybe ask Mr. Sutter to say a few words, would be to look at the deeds that are worth going to deed right away on, and look at the other properties that you might want to hold off a year or two and phase them in, where the goal is to go to 100%, but you don't go to 100% all at once. And I don't know if Eric, if you want to add anything to it? Okay.
So the concern that was raised to me by our state's attorney's office is that if we don't go to deed, then we lose an opportunity and we have to start the process again. I'd hate to see properties just end up in limbo. So I think it's something that we need to discuss more thoroughly and figure out a way that we're just not abandoning some of them, because they're the most problematic properties. I would assume those are the ones we're not going to want to go to
I
deed.
completely agree. There is a cost to going to deed, and that cost is not borne by the agent, it is borne by the county. And so if we can use our research and our ability to prioritize properties and look at properties, see where there might be a potential buyer right away, that should help shape, if you know you can line up a buyer right away, that might shape the priority decisions placed on what goes to deed in phase 1, what goes to deed in phase 2, and what goes to deed in phase 3. Maybe there's only 2 phases, but we welcome that discussion, and we're open to the most financially lucrative way to phase it in.
Right, yeah, I'd be interested in having that more in-depth discussion with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arena. Any other follow-ups by board members? Yes, Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just interested in that slide, so if we could get it via email. The cash flows are very important to me.
Yes, sir.
So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. We have emailed this PowerPoint presentation to Mr. Dornbush, Mr. Haney, and Mr. Vanderwerf, and we're happy to go into detail with it.
Thank you. Any other questions by board members? Okay, seeing none, is that it for your presentation, Mr. Dunn? Okay.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much for your time. And we'll acknowledge that Mr. Billich has joined the meeting. Good to see you. Our next item of business is public comment. We have several speakers here this evening from the community. I'm going to ask Mayor McNamara from the City of Rockford to come on up first to talk about support for the trustee program. As he's coming up, I'll read our disclaimer. Comments shall be limited to 3 minutes. Speakers may not address a zoning matter which is pending before the ZBA, zoning committee, or county board. Personnel matters or pending or threatened litigation may not be addressed in open session. An individual may speak a maximum of 3 times per calendar year on the same topic. This prohibition shall include the repetition of the same topic in a statement of what is purported to be a different topic. Personal attacks or inappropriate language of any sort will not be tolerated. Thank you very much for coming, Mayor.
Well, now I don't know what I'm going to talk about. First, I just want to say a sincere thank you. The City of Rockford enjoys a really good partnership with Winnebago County, and we've often partnered to benefit citizens. So one, I just want to say thank you for taking up what I believe is a significant issue in all of our communities, which is blight. We know that blight, specifically in the City of Rockford, but also in many other municipalities, is a significant problem that drags down property values and is havens for activity and crime. And to me, they often go hand in hand. And I think this evening, we have a unique opportunity, and you have a unique opportunity to stand with so many municipalities, large municipalities like the City of Rockford and Loves Park, McChesney Park, South Beloit, some of our largest taxing districts like the school district, and so many others, to stand and say that we can fight blight together. So I want to say again, I implore you to vote yes when the vote comes up for the R1 proposal. To me, this allows it allows our dollars to stay here. It allows local folks like all of us to have control of our neighborhood's destinies, as opposed to shipping this money and this responsibility out of our county. Today, the current auction format, I don't think is good for small investors. I think it lends more credibility and more credence to large investors. I believe that modernizing that process will help get these properties on the tax rolls faster and be more productive properties overall for all of our neighborhoods and all of our taxing bodies. Secondly, the R1 proposal qualifies buyers. The current program does not. Next, the R1 proposal does cover a substantial amount of the maintenance cost. To me, that's not just good for the municipalities, but that is truly good for all of the taxing bodies in the county. And lastly, just think about the opportunity that you have to take what is blight and turn that into protecting future blight. We have an opportunity to use the funds that come from this program, the funds that often are going to Decatur now, to help fund our local land bank to stop the blight before it even begins. So I thank you for your time and for your thoughtful consideration.
Thank you, Mayor. Our next speaker is the Mayor of South Beloit, Ted Rail. Thank you very much for coming in, Mayor.
It's a pleasure. Must be a thrill to hear from the two bookends, Rockford and South Beloit. We have more in common than in this area than we'd either like to admit, and that is that we're both, relatively speaking, in terms of percentage, we're both full of issues that are compounding our fight to improve our cities, and poverty and crime, all those things just keep imposing on us. This is an opportunity for us to do something about that. It gives us, see, the county can't really cure blight. The city can't cure blight. But there are a number of tools at our disposal that we ought to have access to. And some of that access is to those actual properties for which we can do something with. I got a comment or a question a couple weeks ago about the fact that there's a responsibility to all the taxing bodies, school districts, libraries. And I get that, and there certainly is. But I come from a kind of a unique situation. I was a superintendent of schools, and it didn't help us to have taxing properties that could be taxed send no tax. So it didn't help us at all. What we hoped for was the opportunity to get that back on the tax roll. No matter what it cost us, let's get it back on the tax roll so we can start benefiting. So this is just another tool. It will benefit every taxing body. I can tell you that as a former superintendent, and now even more so. This surgical tool of getting those properties in our hands so that we can continue our fight, not just about blight, but increasing economic development in a small city like South Beloit. It's imperative. So I really am grateful for the opportunity to come down and talk and look at you this way rather than the back of your heads. So I appreciate the time. Thank you for listening, and vote well, and vote often. It would help.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Our next speaker is Reverend, we have Pastor Copeland here this evening, and Pastor, I'll ask you to come on up. The best quote I've heard from a community leader, I've heard from Pastor Copeland, and he says that we, as a community, we're not as much divided as we are disconnected, and he's been a great mentor to me, so it's a great honor to have Pastor Copeland here tonight.
Okay, my name is K. Edward Copeland. I'm the pastor of New Zion Baptist Church, the third pastor in 95 years. I've been here 18 years. If I don't put in another 10, they're going to ask for their money back. So I want to share with you my perspective just from pavement level. New Zion Baptist Church is in Southwest Rockford. It's on Salter Avenue. And since I've been here, first under Doug Scott, then under Larry Morrissey, and now under our current mayor, this has been an issue, particularly for our neighborhood, that resonates in a very personal way. First of all, because of the volume of unsightly properties, of blighted properties in our neighborhood, more than just aesthetics, is an issue as it relates to just property values for my parishioners as well as the church itself. We've been trying to be good neighbors for 18 years, and during those 18 years as just a church, we've purchased at least 16 lots in the neighborhood, and at least 4 of them we purchased just so we could knock the buildings down because of not only their unsightliness, but just public safety. And so beyond aesthetics and property value, I just want to say that this matter is very urgent for neighborhoods like the neighborhood in which I serve because of that public safety issue. These blighted properties are breeding grounds for a lot of crime, and I've been working on the crime issue just as a citizen for a long time, and it's tiring. And so when I heard that there was a tool out here that you were considering, I just wanted to come and lend my voice to say, please take advantage of anything that's going to allow us to leverage our united strengths as well as the capital that we have in order to make Winnebago County a better place. I like Batman better than Superman because Batman doesn't have any powers, he just has a great utility belt. And so I'm hoping that you will take advantage of this tool and put it in your utility belt and really help us make a difference, particularly in the neighborhoods in which people like myself serve. Thank you for listening, and I hope you vote well.
Thank you, Pastor Copeland. Our next speaker is RPS 205 Superintendent Dr. Aaron Jarrett. There's only one rule, is never follow a Baptist preacher in speaking. Congratulations.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here to speak to you tonight. And I want to start off by just saying thank you for some of the previous work that you've done in partnership with the Rockford Public Schools. I want to invite each and every one of you to come visit Constance B. Lane Elementary School when it opens up. The county was a huge driver for that project to be able to happen. We were able to take down 49 homes and purchase those, and I think we've created a beautiful 14-acre campus, and I think it's a real symbol of what we can collectively accomplish when we work together to tackle blight reduction. I'm really accomplish that, and my comments start there, and that is my greatest point of emphasis. However, I do think there are two other additional very important points that I would like to make. The second piece that I would like to discuss is the importance of equalized assessed value. In my tenure as superintendent and prior to that, we saw about 1/3 of the value of our school district drop, our equalized assessed value, and over the last 5 years it's really started to come back. But at one point we lost nearly $1 billion in value. Now we've gotten about 1/3 of that value back, but frankly part of the reason it's been slower to recover than some other communities is because we need better tools to deal with blight. And that brings me to my third point. If we effectively deal with blight and drive up EAV, we are continually committed to good, sound tax policy. We are now in our 8th consecutive year of holding the line in our levy, and as property values increase, we believe that tax rates can decrease. So there's a real economic incentive as well. So again, I want to thank you for your partnership on Constance Lane Elementary as well as on Cherry Valley Elementary. I want to thank you for your consideration of this important tool for blight reduction, because I think it can make families' lives better, which will have a huge impact on student achievement over time. I believe that it can dramatically increase EAV over time. And finally, as it increases EAV, we can work together as taxing bodies to continue to drive property tax rates down. Thank you for your time, and I really appreciate your consideration on this important initiative.
Thank you, Dr. Jarrett. Our next speaker is Ian Lindenberry, who is the chairman of the Rockford Park District Board of Commissioners. Thank you, Ian.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Clerk, Madam State's Attorney, esteemed members of the board. Like the speakers before me, I very much appreciate your time and your attention tonight. I can tell by the deliberate questions that were asked earlier and the questions that I've received in one-on-one conversations with several of you that you're taking this matter very, very seriously. And as a fellow elected official, I can appreciate the sense of responsibility that you must feel to the taxpayers to get such a monumentous decision right. And I think you should feel good about the diligence in which you've engaged to date to explore this proposal. I'm here to speak, like those before me, in support of it. I have reviewed it in the competing proposal. I have as a practicing attorney whose law practice focuses in large part on real estate transactions and related taxing issues. I'm very familiar with the sections of the property tax code that are at play here, and I think that this proposal provides some really unique tools that the county could use. And I hate to sound repetitive, because this is the same message that's been conveyed time and time again by the speakers, and I think you're going to hear it from others as well, but it's evident on the face of the proposal. It's in my mind, a very clear choice for the county to make to do something on a collaborative basis with the other taxing bodies that are impacted by the incidences of blight, and specifically, as Dr. Jarrett just mentioned, the declining EAV in our community. The statistic that Dr. Jarrett cited is one that I talk about a lot. Within the Rockford Park District boundaries, we lost nearly $1 billion in EAV. And it is starting to tick back up. It's trending in the right direction. And the tools that are provided through this proposal, I think, will accelerate that upward curve. And as we continue to increase the EAV, we will levy the same amount of tax dollars, and the rate will go down. We'll be doing the responsible thing for taxpayers, and that's very important to me, both as a taxpayer and, like you, as an elected official, a fiduciary to the taxpayers that I serve. Now, I'm also very sensitive to the notion that you all have been elected by the constituents you serve to make this very important decision. And nobody's opinion, not mine, not anyone else in this audience, nobody's opinion could supplant yours. You are charged with making this important vote. And I know that you're taking it seriously. I know you've conducted your diligence. This has been going on for a long time. The mayor and the chairman first started talking about this back in the spring of 2018, and you've all been actively engaged in the discussions regarding it, and I know that the vote is coming soon, and I hope that you will favorably consider it. I think that it's the right thing to do. It keeps the dollars here locally. The implementation and use of the land bank gives a fundamental tool to avoid the sale and error process that perpetuates the cycle of these properties winding up back in the tax foreclosure process and never becoming anything, never being put to their highest and best use to the benefit of this community. So I thank you very much for your time and your consideration on this, and I hope that at the end of the analysis that you undertake, you will support the R1PC's county trustee proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lindenberry. Our next speaker is Jay Hanley from the Rock River Water Reclamation District. Thank you for coming, Jay.
Thank you, and I am General Counsel of the Reclamation District. We're a little bit different than some of the parties you may hear from tonight. In terms of revenue, you know, the taxes are not our lifeblood. Our lifeblood is our user fees, and so again, we're a little bit different from some of the municipalities you'll hear from. And so for us, why we support the program, the district, is at the end of all this, of course, we want people in those houses, and we want them to be back users of our system, in short, taking showers and flushing the toilets. So that's our interest, our primary interest. The other thing that why we're a little bit different is we have what's called special assessments, and that's when the public actually finances certain projects, and those are collected in the same way that property taxes are. Now, again, when you think about the whole pie, it's a fairly small piece, but we do have kind of skin in the game, if you will, and we are in support of the RPC1 proposal and hope that you would vote in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanley. Our next speaker is Brian Davis from Supply Corps. Thank you for coming, Brian.
Thank you. Well, I have my prepared ad libs, so I might be the first to get the hook tonight. I'm going to try to get through this quickly, but thank you for the opportunity to speak about this urgent issue that impacts all of the citizens of Winnebago County. My name is Brian Davis. I'm Vice President of Government Affairs and Community Engagement at Supply Corps. I'm also a resident of Rockton and South Beloit area, and I serve on the RACVB board as well as the Rockford Regional Good Government PAC. And I want to express my strong support for the Region 1 Planning Council, R1, to be designated as the agent to the county trustee for Winnebago County's delinquent tax program as quickly as possible. There are currently over 600 parcels of property in the trustee program, and some have been there over 10 years. I've been involved with economic development for the Rockford, Winnebago County area for the past 26 years. For 20 years, I worked for Congressman Don Manzullo, working hard to advance economic growth for our area. And our office worked very closely with our Metropolitan Planning Organization and our Economic Development District, now folded in under the Region 1 Planning Council. And we worked with them to bring more federal grant funding to our community. So I know R1 has the capability that's necessary to conduct complex government planning and program implementation. Congress created the MPOs and the planning councils really to be a resource for our local communities and put power back in the hands of our local government and not unelected federal bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. I know firsthand the expertise and professionalism, the strong technical capacity and data that the R1 Planning Council teams bring to our community here in Rockford. R1 Council is accountable to our local elected representatives. They're governed by a board of locally elected principals and accountable to the voters. All of you as county board members have jurisdictional oversight over the actions and programming of the R1 Council. The R1 Council has the ability to take this county trustee program and implement an innovative approach that will save taxpayer dollars and get blighted properties back on their property tax rolls as soon as possible. It'll be a model for the state. This approach will also be a revenue generator for our county and local governments. It just makes sense. Housing the county trustee program within R1 will allow the synergy that we've heard about already with the local land bank program under R1. It's critical that there's close coordination between the two programs, which will allow proceeds from the county trustee program to be reinvested and help fund the acquisition of blighted properties, clearing the titles and allowing them to be sold back to the private sector quickly. R1's based right here in our community. They're going to be able to collaborate closely with our local city governments to battle the blight problem. Finally, our company, Supply Corps, has been investing tens of millions of dollars in redeveloping vacant properties in blighted areas throughout our community. Other businesses are doing the same, and we ask that the county board be a partner in doing this. So once again, I respectfully request the county board move quickly and hire the R1 Planning Council to run the trustee program. Please don't delay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davis. That concludes our comments from the community portion. Our next item of business would be board member correspondence. Any board member comments this evening? Mrs. Redd.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to inform the board that George Ann Duckett, who was a longtime board member, passed away recently. And I'd like us to offer a minute of silence, a silent prayer for her. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Wright. Any other board member comments? I see Mr. Arena, then Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wondering if our state's attorney has received the bill for the sheriff's attorney?
Yes, we received it today.
How much do we owe to this point?
Invoice received today from Mr. Apple, $45,640.36. Excuse me if you couldn't hear me. Invoice received from Mr. Echo, $45,640.36 received today, actually this evening, shortly before a meeting. It will be presented in court on the next court date.
Thank you for getting that.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Arena. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My comment kind of goes back to all the presentations we just had. One thing I've heard is you're trying to facilitate us going to Region 1 Planning Council with this because you potentially may have a job there after your tenure as County Board Chairman. Can you address that? Is there any truth to that?
Yes, and full disclosure, Mr. McDonald approached me about this question the other day, and I encouraged him to ask it on the board floor with all of our partners here, all the media here. This is the pathetic state of our politics in this community. This is exactly why I ran for chairman, was to change this crap. I am disgusted by the actions of our auditing office, and that a member of their staff that should be focused on auditing and good government is making assertions that are baseless, that are not based on policy and reform and community development. And I'm absolutely, this is par for the course with some behavior that I've observed. Number one, you will not see me working there. However, I see them as a critical partner to a lot of organizations, including Winnebago County. And I do appreciate Mr. McDonald having the respect for me when he hears baseless smear tactics, to just have a conversation, and appreciate the opportunity to respond to your question. Thank you. I saw some other hands up. Mr. Boomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a statement here that we have committee chairs for a reason, to run the different committees and to set board agendas. This week, an ordinance was taken from the agenda, not by the chair of the committee, but by the county board chairman. I hope this was a simple mistake of not knowing the board rules. I also expect this never to happen again. To happen again. I would like the state's attorney to review the rules so that we don't make the same mistake again. Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boomer. I'll just speak to this very directly. In our conversation 72 hours ago, I explained to you very clearly that this issue was on the agenda. It was pulled because of some other personnel matters related to another administrator looking for a position potentially that you confirmed. You also agreed with the pulling of that from the agenda. You've clearly changed your position, which you have a right to do when more information comes available, and I will take very seriously going forward. Very rarely have we pulled items between committee and board. It is not done so lightly. It was done so with good reason. It will be on the next board agenda. I've invited Mr. Fiducia, if he so chooses, to come on up tonight and talk to the very issue. You can suspend the rules at the next meeting. It'll keep us on the timeline. I find it very peculiar that now, not for the first time, you've changed a position between a private conversation and one that then you assert publicly. Thank you very much, Mr. Boomer. Are there any other hands? Oh, Mrs. Crosby.
This is a question for State's Attorney Height Ross. Is there any way that you can provide to the board a detailed invoice on the SOTO invoice? We have the amount, but we don't have the breakdown.
Well, the reason you don't have the breakdown, Mrs. Crosby, is pursuant to ordinance, when there is an unfounded investigation, it is to remain confidential, and to disclose an itemized bill regarding who the investigators interviewed would not keep that investigation confidential. So this is pursuant to Winnebago County ordinance. That is why it has not been disclosed to the county board.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, State's Attorney Hat Ross. Thank you, Mrs. Crosby. I believe there's another hand up. Mr. Westcott.
Thank you. First, I want to ask, do we have any veterans in this room? Okay, even in the gallery? Okay. Would you all stand up for a minute, please? Thank you. Thank you. The reason I brought that up is on Memorial Day, any of these gentlemen and ladies could have done the proclamation for the county at Memorial Hall, but none of these gentlemen were asked, and that to me is an appalling situation. And the next on my agenda here is, I want to start out with, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not standing before you to represent Republicans or Democrats. I'm not standing before you to representing caucuses, committees, or any other group. I am standing before you representing each and every taxpayer of Winnebago County who deserves better government. The taxpayers elected all of us on the board, as well as the role of the chairman. With regards to the chairman, he promised the ACT, A-C-T, accountability, collaboration, and transparency. In reality, we've got nothing but acrimony, contempt, and tyranny. The taxpayers deserve better. Time and time again, the chairman has not lived up to his own campaign slogan. And time again, the chairman's actions have proven to be reckless, that on previous occasions, myself and others have to call for him to step down in the last year. Now, here we are again. Truly egregious behavior. I find myself asking the chairman again to step down. From reckless budget cuts to public safety, irresponsible administrative spending, to the hemorrhaging of taxpayers' dollars on lawsuits, legal fees, and now with a car accident on Saturday, this chairman has done more to cost taxpayers financially than any other previous administration. The car accident on Saturday was the latest and most flagrant disregard for long-standing county policies and procedures. It was also a selfish act that has put the financial interest of every county taxpayer in jeopardy. I am just grateful that there was no serious injuries. Let's go over some facts. The vehicle was being used for personal business and was also transporting the chairman's son. Both of these acts are in direct violation of the current vehicle policy adopted by the county back in 2018. They included both elected and non-elected officials. The vehicle was not properly tagged and registered with the state of Illinois. The chairman was provided a check from the county to pay for the registration and tags prior to their expiration. The fact that this was not done and there's no accounting for the outstanding check are unacceptable behavior from anyone, let alone someone in a leadership role. The chairman's driver's license was not valid at the time of the accident, also a direct violation of county policy. The chairman did not complete an alcohol drug test in the outlined appropriate time, also a direct violation of county policy. Insurance isn't for negligent policy abuse, nor does it protect taxpayers from legal action. Also, being a self-insured entity, all costs ultimately fall on the taxpayer. Please, ladies and gentlemen, none of us are above the policies and procedures we are elected to put into place and uphold by taxpayers of this county, especially the chairman. The kind of behavior has led to the immediate termination of other county employees in the past. So therefore, it is only fitting for me to ask the chairman once again, step down immediately. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Westcott. Are there any other board members with questions or comments this evening? Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't have a question so much as I was reading and also heard Mrs. Crosby discussing about having insurance, and she said something that we probably all think, right, that that's why we have insurance. But then I thought about my years on the county that we were self-insured, and I was thinking, well, what is the difference between being self-insured and having insurance? And I would like Carla to explain just the difference of what being self-insured and if you have an insurance policy where the insurance company will write you a check when you have, your accident report or whatever. So could you explain that, Carla?
Sure. If you have vehicle insurance, you pay a premium and you have a deductible. If you have an accident and there's a claim, the insurance company will write you a check or pay for the repair of the damages, less the amount of your deductible. We're self-insured. We have a tort liability levy each year, so there's property taxes funding our tort claims. We're self-insured up to an insurance retention amount of $250,000, meaning anything that costs up to $250,000 we pay from that property tax levy. Anything over $250,000, our insurance company would write a check to us.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Carla.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Webster.
Yeah, thank you. I passed out something to all the board members this evening here. It's a one-page sheet there. Item 16 on this document is titled Host County Fee. This is from the resolution the county board did in November of 2011, and it's for the execution of the host fees, the county agreement with the landfill. There's been, I've been pretty hot on this issue with host fees and the way we've been using them, and we're spending money like crazy on there. In the words of the late Mary Ann Aiello, we spend money like a bunch of drunken sailors. No offense to the sailors. But It's always been, the argument keeps coming up there that, well, you know, these are supposed to be used for economic development. They're supposed to be used for economic development. And I've been arguing that it's not just economic development. I've been arguing that we should be keeping some of this host fee money for our internal needs, which we have many, and some areas of the county are in dire need of repair work and things that we need internally, okay? We got a public safety building that's gonna cost millions of bucks to get torn down. We don't have it. If some of those multi-millions of dollars that we've given away for so-called economic development, if we would have harbored some of that money, we would have the money to do that. This is the second year in a row now we're going on a deficit budget. 2 years. We can't keep sustaining that way. It's been said many times, over and over, this money's for economic development. I've been arguing many times over and over, that is not just for economic development. The chairman himself has said, we made that promise. No, we didn't. There's not a promise anywhere that says we'd use it for economic development. Nowhere. So I will read this, number 16. Host county fee. Winnebago Landfill Company shall pay the county a host county fee determined in the manner set forth below. The host county fee may be used by the county for such benefits, services, and facilities as are customarily and legally permitted to be funded from the county's general fund. Nowhere in the entire document is the word or phrase economic development appear in there. So I want to put this to rest once and for all. Because what happened, we started spending host fee money, some of it went for an economic development pursuit, some maybe then another one did, then another one did, suddenly it turned into a habit. And so suddenly this habit turned into something concrete, that's what they're supposed to be used for. And we got way off track. And out of the hundreds of millions of dollars that we've committed out of these host fees, had we kept any of these for ourselves, for our internal needs, to take care of us first before we start being so benevolent and giving it away to everyone. We got to take care of ourselves here, folks. We have $260-something thousand left in that host fee fund currently. That's what we got out of what, 3.5, 4 million this year. That's what we have. We have nothing to show for it. We didn't put any of that money in the bank to take care of our internal needs. We wound up going out and borrowing money, getting bond after bond after bond in order to do things, once again, like tearing down that public safety building. Come on, people. Get a hold of yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Any other comments by board members? Mr. Neighbors.
I have a flyer from the West Side Business Association. It says the mission of the West Side Business Association is to provide quality service to the community, neighborhoods, and entrepreneurs on the west side of the river, and to ensure safety and beautification, and to continue support for our thriving business. On Thursday, June 20th, Senator Dave Severson will be the speaker. It will be at 7 p.m. at Fuzzy's Mexican American Restaurant at 2515 Kilbur Avenue. This meeting is for all interested in the West Side businesses and residents. For more information, please contact Alderman Thompson Kelly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neighbors. Any other comments by board members? Yes, Mrs. Rudd.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. I would like to announce that on June 19th, we're having Juneteenth in Mississippi Park, and Mr. Meeks is in the back. Would you explain that to us a little bit more, please?
He just left.
Did I miss him? Okay, but I had a flyer, but I don't know. But anyways, what time? Elsie, can you speak to that,
Mr.
please?
Neighbors can speak to that, I believe. If that's okay, we'll go to Mr. Neighbors.
Okay, I'm pulling the flyer up.
Oh, Tiana has copies for everybody. She will pass that around if that's okay, Mrs. Rudd.
Oh, thank you.
So we'll get everybody a copy of Juneteenth, which is coming up on June 19th.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Tiana. Thank you, Mrs. Red. Any other comments by board members? Okay, moving on to the chairman's report. Just a quick item. Would encourage everybody to tune in after our board meeting for more excitement. I'm hoping Mr. Van Vliet wins the NBA title. You remember last summer, Fred came and spoke to the board very briefly, and just very proud of him and his family and everything he's accomplishing, and wish him the best this evening. Next item is announcements and communications. I'll turn things over to Clerk Gamon.
Mr. Chairman, the items listed below were received as correspondence.
We'll place those on file. Next item of business is the consent agenda, and that includes the raffle report, approval of the May 9 meeting minutes, and layover of the May 23rd meeting minutes. May I please have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Motion by Mr. Hoffman and a second by Mr. Neighbors. Item is now before the board. Any discussion by board members on the consent agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. We've approved the consent agenda unanimously. Thank you very much. Next item of business, County Administrator's Report. Carla.
Thank you, Chairman. As we mentioned in the Personnel and Policy Committee meeting, we had a meeting with the HR and Finance Department to develop a plan to address all of the Baker-Tilly recommendations. I just want to note that many of the processes and munis utilization had already been in progress and will proceed over the next few years. Our highest priority is to implement the comp time policy. We're looking at a 90-day implementation for that, and we'll keep you updated on the process. Last week, Chris Dornbush overviewed our host fee incentive policy. It included a revolving fee fund that would provide loans to municipalities to provide incentives. We got the feeling from the committee that they would like us to direct incentives towards that revolving loan fund, so we'll revise the policy just a little bit to include that. We'll have the policy coming to the committee and then to the board on June 27th. We had a subcommittee meeting last night for the Economic Development Committee to discuss the annual award host fee policy. We had a procedure developed, but we now are looking at developing and presenting a policy to the board to approve. I updated what was discussed last night and distributed a proposed policy to the subcommittee members for review and comment. I've heard from the project manager over the last few weeks for the public safety building project. They've begun their interviews with stakeholders and will keep me updated on that process. We've continued to have transition meetings with Swedish American for the Wellness Center. We're really excited about how that process is going. They're very attentive. They're making sure that we cover all the bases, and the scheduled opening is planned for July 1st. Our budget review meetings with the elected officials and department heads are in progress. We'll be making recommendations and hopefully have a draft budget the first week in July. And then I'd like to announce that Sheila Story, our administrator at River Bluff, has tendered her resignation. We made an offer to Pat McDormand, who served as our interim administrator. She's developed a lot of teamwork over the period of time that she's been with us so far. They've implemented staffing programs that have helped our hiring and retention. And today our census was up to 182. We had fallen back down into about the 170s, but the census is back up to 182. I know she has some plans to have some Alzheimer units, and then we're looking into having some rehab beds, so we're just hoping that the census will continue to climb. Ann gave me some updates on the Ware building. The project will start on Monday, June 24th. The project will take about 4.5 months to complete. You'll see that they'll be putting up walk-through scaffolding. However, they'll be performing the work from a swing boom. The scaffolding is to provide protection for the staff and pedestrians. All 4 sides of the building will be repaired, and they plan to start on the west side on Winnebago Street. The contractor's work hours will be from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., Monday through Friday. And then Joe Vanderwerf has an update for you.
Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to take a moment to update the county board on the hazard mitigation study. If you'll recall, I mentioned previously that we thought we might need as much as $58,000 in an amended budget to be able to fund that program, but we've worked out an agreement with R1PC to be able to do that at no additional cost to the county by using the hours that are allocated to the county starting in fiscal year 2020, which starts July 1st. So we'll be able to go forward without any additional funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Good news. Thank you, Joe. Thank you. And thank you, Carla, for your update. Next item of business, standing committee reports, zoning committee. Mr. Webster.
Thank you. Thank you. Zoning Committee has 2 items on the agenda this evening. These are both to be voted on. They were read in priorly, and both these items came with approval from Zoning Board of Appeals with conditions, and they both got approved unanimously, and they both got approved unanimously once again as Zoning Committee with conditions. So for the record, I think we can vote on these together, if that's all right.
It's a motion by, I take that as a motion by Mr. Webster to approve item 1 and 2 at the same time. May I please have a second? A second by Mr. Fellers. Item is now before the board. Would you like to speak to them, Mr.
Okay.
Webster?
Thank you. For the record, I move to approve SU 0419, it's a special use permit, and number 2 is SU 0319, it's also a special use permit. I move to approve both.
We got a motion and a second already on the floor for those 2 items, so we're good on that. Any other discussion or questions regarding SU 0419, SU 0319? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving both items, action items 1 and 2 under zoning, signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We've approved items 1 and 2 on the zoning committee list. Mr. Webster.
Okay, now we're on a roll. Announcement I have, Chairman Erickson announces his zoning board of appeals meeting will be July 10th, and the next follow-up committee for zoning committee will be June the 26th. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Next item of business, Economic Development Committee, Mr. Westcott.
Thank you. We have 2 resolutions before us tonight. One is a resolution directing the County of Winnebago to use $25,000 in host fees for the Great Neighborhoods Program of Rockford Region, and I so moved.
Got a motion by Mr. Westcott on item 2 under Economic Development Committee. That's the resolution regarding the Great Neighborhoods Program of the Rockford Region for in the amount of $25,000. I got a second by Mrs. Crosby and Mr. Gurl. Item is now before the board. Any discussion on this item that's been motioned and seconded? Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've heard me talk in the past about my concerns about our overall budget scenario, our deficit spending, and needing to look to any resource that we can, and I do believe that the host fees right now are in a category. It appears to me that it's just get in quick while you can because there's a little bit of money left, and so my encouragement to the board is to stop that. I understand that, you know, whatever's the vested interests that are bringing these specific proposals tonight have a bias and desire to see those things happen. It's not that I think they're bad things, it's that I think we have other priorities we need to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Any other discussion on item 2, the Great Neighborhoods proposal? I believe Mr. Neighbors was first, then Mr. Kelly. Mr. Neighbors.
In committee meeting, when Mr. Anderson came back for a second time to come talk about the project, I asked him how could the project benefit neighborhoods in the Westgate Coalition, and he really didn't give me a good answer on how it would benefit. He just said he hoped that they would participate. And what I get the feeling from this type of project is that it's going to benefit the neighborhoods that really don't even need any help. So I don't even see why we would give money to support that when there are already neighborhoods that are thriving in that area. And that's how, my take on the situation.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Neighbors. Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, I'm concerned the host fee has liabilities against it that we don't even have quantified at this point. We owe Waste Connections money. They claim that they overpaid us. We owe city elections money. We owe New Milford money. And we can't keep, our funds are limited. It's not an open piggy bank. And we have to stop doing this. We don't even know how much we owe those entities yet.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly, for comments. Any other comments by board members? Yes, Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we discussed this in committee, there was a motion made to make it clear that we were not funding personnel for this organization, but now, in reading what we have here before us, it states, which paragraph, that they need to, right, so it'd be the fourth paragraph down, in order for Great Neighborhoods to provide all the assistance necessary to achieve the goals of revising neighborhoods in the Rockford region, it needs to retain a director. Does this, worded like this, imply that we're funding a director?
Point of order. This is actually the wrong resolution. We modified this and amended it, and they put the wrong resolution.
But I think we didn't take out this, I think we took it out from other places, but we missed here. So, or maybe you're correct, Mr. Fellers, but I'm not sure if this is going to pass or not, but if it does, we want to make it crystal clear this is a one-time payment and we're not funding personnel. So does this language need to be amended?
Let's go ahead and make the motion to amend the resolution to include, if I'm understanding the intent of the committee meeting, and if there was an administrative error, and just make sure we're correct on the floor. There's a motion by Mr. Arena to clarify the record that the dollars would be spent on a one-time basis and would not be allocated towards personnel. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And I'll take a second to that. I have a second by Mr. Butita and Mrs. Crosby, and I believe Mrs. Gorel. The amended motion is now before the board. That is separate than a final vote. That is just to amend the item that is before the board now, and I believe we'll be okay by doing a voice vote. All those in, excuse me, all those in favor of amending the motion to include, to clarify that it's a one-time allocation and that it would not be used for personnel purposes, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed to that amendment? Motion passes unanimously. We've amended the motion before the board for the Great Neighborhood Project to include those two items. It's on a one-time basis, and the dollars are not to be used for personnel. Item is still before the board for discussion. The amended motion is still before the board for discussion. Any other questions or comments by board members? Mr. Webster.
Yes. If it's not going to be used for paycheck, what will that money be used for?
So, Mr. Webster, what I'm going to do is ask Mr. O'Keefe or Mr. Anderson to speak directly to that so that we're directly aligned here before there's a final action. Patrick.
Sure, thank you.
We do have a microphone.
Thank you for the question. There are other costs to administer the program. We have things like a website, we have advancements in training of neighborhood leaders, so there are other program expenses other than salary associated with the program.
Thank you very much. So we're agreeing then, Patrick, that if this would pass the county board this evening, that the dollars would go towards non-personnel items. I'm seeing both shake heads, and we could just check back and report back on that. Follow-up, Mr. Webster?
Yes, I have follow-up on that. Who else is contributing $25,000?
We have a commitment from private foundation. We have a commitment from the city of Rockford. We have a partnership financial commitment from the Rockford Park District. Yes. And we have commitment from the city of Rockford. We have financial commitment from private foundation funders, as well as the Rockford Park District.
And the city of Rockford and the Rockford Park District is each in for $25,000?
It's $20,000 from the city of Rockford and $10,000 from the Park District.
They also have a partnership.
Yes, and the city of Rockford has part of the negotiating with them. They've hired a neighborhood specialist that is a part of our team and working on the project.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and thank you, Mr. Webster, for your question. Any other comments or questions on the amended motion before the board? Mr. Fellers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is that
Yes, it is.
Okay. Just to add to that, yes, the city's contribution was not just the funds, but they also hired a neighborhood specialist in Barb Chidley. I actually met with Barb the day after our development meeting. She and I churched together, so that was a very easy meeting to set up. And I think she's excited having this resource. Her role is very much more administrative, day-to-day operations of specific neighborhoods, whereas this role is really much more aspirational around the marketing and vision for what we want this region to be.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fellers. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll on the amended motion related to the Great Neighborhoods Project. A yes vote would pass, a no vote would fail. Clerk, come up.
Okay. Mr. Webster?
No.
Mr. Westcott?
Yes.
Mr. Arena?
Yes.
Mr. Billich?
Yes.
Mr. Boomer? Mr. Booker?
Yes.
Mr. Butita?
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby?
Yes.
Mr. Fellers?
Yes.
Mr. Fiducia?
No.
Mr. Gurl?
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
No.
Mr. McDonald?
No.
Mr. Neighbors?
No.
Mrs. Red?
Yes.
Mr. Salgado?
Yes.
Mr. Schultz?
No.
Mr. Tassoni?
No.
8 noes.
12 yes. Motion, amended motion passes. Thank you very much, and thank you for the gentleman that spoke to this in the back of the room. I'll go back to Mr. Westcott.
I still move the resolution to, I move the resolution to pass this now.
Oh, we've already amended, and now we just passed, so we'll move on to the next item.
All right,
We're good
I'm
on-
sorry.
We're good on that
My
one, we'll move
apologies.
to the next one.
Had me confused there.
That's okay.
Next, we have a resolution allocating host fees in the amount of $15,000 to the Youth Against Violence organization from the Hill Rock Marching Matadors Summer Camp. And I so move, and I'd like to speak on this as well.
Yes, sir. I've got a motion by Mr. Westcott on the resolution regarding the Youth Against Violence organization. May I have a second, please, Mr. Gurl, Mrs. Crosby? Item is now before the board, and I'll turn things back over to Mr. Westcott.
Thank you. I had an opportunity to watch what this gentleman or this family does for the youth, and it is an absolutely amazing thing that he can do and how he can get these kids from real small to my height. And they do actually a wonderful job, and I hope you will support this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Westcott. Any other comments or questions by board members on item 3, the Youth Against Violence organization, the $15,000 at one-time allocation of host fees? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? I believe I saw a no vote from Mr. Schultz and Mr. Kelly. Are there any other no votes? Mr. Webster, there are 3 no votes, and they'll be noted. Mr. Webster, Mr. Schultz, and Mr. Kelly. All other board members have indicated a yes vote. Motion passes. Thank you very much, Mr. Westcott.
Thank you. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Westcott. Next item of business is the Operations Administrative Committee. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This evening, we've got a resolution to redivide election precincts, and I move for adoption.
We got a motion by Mr. McDonald on item 2 under the Ops Committee, resolution to redivide election precincts. May I have a second, please? Mr. Hoffman on the second, thank you. And any discussion or questions by board members? Seeing, oh yes, Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did have the question, and I want to ask it again. So, one of the things is cost that associated with dividing the precinct, and it was mentioned that there would be no additional cost. I just want confirmation again, just on that aspect of it, since last time we had a kind of like a lawsuit with the Republican caucus of Winnebago County asking for dividing a district that, a precinct that had 800 voters in that district. So I understand the state statute, but I just wanted to get information on the cost, if there was going to be any additional costs with machines or printing or anything like that. So I don't know if the clerk could address that question for the whole county board. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question, Mr. Salgado. Clerk Gummo.
Mr. Salgado, we have the existing machines. This is actually redividing majority of the precincts that were combined years ago, so we have all the equipment that we used previously. The additional cost will be that for the staffing, so that'll be the election judges and their training. Basically, it'll be the same cost for the ballots because it's the same amount of voters. We're utilizing the same number of polling locations, so there will not be any additional cost for that. So again, to be very specific, it'll be a cost of the election judges and the staff time to recruit and schedule.
Thank you.
Mr. Salgado, you're fine. Thank you. No follow-up there. Any other questions or comments by board members? Can I just, one quick question, maybe it's a Mr. McDonald question, maybe it's a state's attorney question. Was there any discussion with either the Democrat folks, Democrat local party, or the Republican local party this time around? I know, I'm just double checking before we take the, I'll throw the question at, was that a discussion in committee, or was that a discussion?
We did discuss Republican and Democratic. Clerk Gummo, you indicated that you've spoke with both, and the biggest challenge is going to be finding election judges.
And again, we are following election code. That is the code that we have no more than 800 voters per precinct, so we are just following code.
And they expressed?
Yes.
They expressed happiness with that particular fact. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry about that. Thank you, Clerk Gummo. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Any other discussion on item 2, the redividing the election precincts? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For some reason, we have a resolution before us once again, authorizing communication with the Illinois General Assembly regarding proposed changes to the property tax code for sales and error in tax deeds. Why is this before us again?
Yes, this was a reconsideration on a prior vote.
Could we talk a little bit about why it was, and as chairman of the committee, I'm a little bit upset that you weren't reached out to me to say, hey, this is what's going on. So it kind of blindsided me. So I'm not prepared to speak to this tonight, Mr. Chairman. Could you explain to me why we're reconsidering?
Yes, and I sent an email shortly after. Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. I sent an email shortly after, or before the 10-day mark on the reconsideration, and it's a very simple concern, and it's not about this particular policy, whatever it was that the board passed. I don't know if the board knew what particular policy it was adopting when they did it, or which particular board member would be the point person to deliver a particular message that was not clear. The one concern that I had, and that I just wanted to bring it back and state it for the record with all due respect, is that one of the few remaining, I think, not manipulated or reduced or whatever ordinance changes in the myriad of ordinance changes over multiple years now, was the idea of that the chairman would be the point on things in Springfield. And all I would say in retort, Mr. McDonald, and with all due respect, is I apologize for not having a direct discussion. In all honesty, I think me and you had to discuss a couple more important issues that were more timely and more to this thing. But it just concerned me that nobody had the discussion with me with respect on the particular policy issues, because I'd like to be a partner. I cannot be a partner with the board. I cannot fulfill the few duties that are remaining of the chairman that have not been monkeyed with to this point, if I'm not engaged to have a policy discussion. This is really important stuff. There are multiple streams going on. There's a tax delinquent process with the trustee program. There's a number of bills that were going on related to this, and all I would say is I appreciate your comment, Mr. McDonald. I should have had a conversation with you. In our number of conversations, I thought we talked about other things that were more pressing. I too was disappointed in this board that a conversation around issues before we bring something that really is a backdoor way of further changing the ordinance and the duties of chairman. I want to partner with things in Springfield. So if I'm not given that opportunity, I don't know how I can fill the duties that are in the ordinance. If we use resolutions to undercut the position of chairman that are laid out in ordinance, I see that as a violation of the policy. And I am concerned that policies were passed or rolled out the day after we passed it. That was a concern, and I would just say that that is something I want to engage. If you guys ever want to talk policy or engaging on legislative strategy, I'm game to do that. But I did want to bring that up and just put that on the record. I apologize, that was the one board meeting I've missed in 2 years, or I would have stated it that evening. It does not mean anything other than that, but Mr. McDonald, I'll apologize to you because I didn't have that specific discussion. I meant no disrespect, but I think it was equally disrespectful that there was no communication around that. Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to give you the background, because I was thinking while you were speaking, and then you reminded me you weren't here that night. I did bring Mr. Emmert's suggested changes to committee, and there wasn't a lot of questioning on that night, and I failed to bring the specific language that Mr. Emmert had suggested the night we voted on it, which I apologized for because it was problematic. This was originally just Mr. Emmert saying, suggesting some ideas. I was aware that there were bills out there, wanted to just be able to reach out and say, is there a possibility of incorporating this into what's happening? I was advised by the state's attorney that we would need a resolution to do that, so that's why it was done by resolution. We made a deliberate decision to not specify who would do it because anybody could have done it, and you included. It wasn't intended to circumvent your authority at all, and we'd be happy to have you continue to work on it, or somebody to continue to work on it. As it turned out, the day after we passed it, all the bills that were related to this subject matter were shelved, and so it was kind of moot at that point. However, if you, I sent an email out just to the board members with some information on what we give back and sell in error. And I was sending it more in reference to our conversations that's happening with the trustee program. But if you look at that email, you'll see $770,000 last year, $1 million in the preceding 4 years. So it's a significant amount of money Mr. Emmert's suggestions are based on his experience and how it would lessen sales and error. I think it's worthwhile to pursue it, and, you know, if you feel we need to amend it to specify that you're the person that handles it, that's fine. Somebody should, because it's a worthwhile effort, and it's Springfield too, so you go down there and, you know, it's all about compromise. So tonight, Carla had passed out the, you know, the language that Mr. Emmert had suggested. If you look at it, it's, you know, crossed out what we would remove from the existing statute and underline what he would suggest adding to the statute. So I would suggest that we continue to work on this subject and try to pursue these changes. And Mr. Chairman, if you'd like to do that, that's wonderful.
Thank you. Just to follow up to that, the disappointment I have extends to the state's attorney's office, because after all this discussion related to ordinance changes and who's doing what, and duties here and duties there, and confusion over duties and all that, I think by now, the one thing that was clear is the few duties left for the chairman, and if Mr. Emmert, who is really proficient in this, would like to engage me in discussion, I want to be part of the discussion, not the whole discussion. The discussion does not stop and end with me. However, I would ask also for the state's attorney's office, since they are the legal experts, they are very proficient in understanding ordinances and ordinance changes, what is there that is left for me to do. Please include me in those discussions or bring me into the fold. I just want to be part of the discussion, and that's very important because these issues affect all of our citizens. And thank you very much. Mr. Arena on a follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make clear, Mr. Emmert did not initiate this. We're having ongoing conversation about the subject, and in that, you know, he brought up broad ideas, and I said, well, we could maybe address it now. So it was me that motivated it, and it's because it's work I'm already doing with the apartment association, so for me, it was just a matter of, it seems simple, and it turned out apparently not to be so simple. But I meant no offense to you, and I promise you, Mr. Emmert had, you know, he wasn't the driving force, it was me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arena. I get it, and I understand it's a moot point with the policies that didn't proceed in Springfield. It was also concurrent at the time of the trustee discussion with the state statute become clear on who makes the appointment with the trustee program. So there's a couple of kind of issues related to this very larger issue that hit at the same time. And so I put that on the agenda at that time, or communicated that as such. It's a moot point at this point, so, you know, a vote to change something that is not going to be discussed in Springfield doesn't make sense at this time. At the time I sent the reconsideration, that was very much in play, and the trustee thing related to tax delinquent properties, I just wanted to make sure there was alignment and clarity over who's doing what. Thank you very much, Mr. Arena. Mr. Boomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just another one of those incidences that the chair of the committee had no idea that this was going to be on the agenda. So, I mean, this is what I was talking about, and you chose to, like, deflect it to something else. And I mean, is this going to happen every board meeting, that you're just going to change it to whatever you want?
Yes, Mr. Boomer. As chairman, I can ask the board to reconsider things within 10 days. They do not go back to committee. They come back to the full board. So when the full board takes action, which you did, within 10 days, I made the reconsideration, and it was it was past the 48-hour rule with our last board meeting. So, no, it comes back to the full board for discussion, not to a particular committee. And yes, Mr. Boomer, we'll be very mindful of that, but I did communicate that to the entire board. Since it comes back to the entire board, I wanted the entire board to be aware of it. Thank you very much. Mr. Boomer on a follow-up.
I'd like to vote to send it back to committee.
We got a motion by Mr. Boomer to send it back to committee, got a second by Mr. Fellers, and Mr. Hoffman, and Mr. Westcott. Motion and a second to send it back to committee. Any questions on the motion and the second to send it back to the Operations Committee? Seeing none, all those in favor of sending this back to committee signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? We have a no vote by Mr. Salgado, and I believe I saw another hand up, a no vote by Mr. Salgado, or Mr. Arena, and a no vote by Mr. Kelly. So we have a motion and a second. We've sent this item back to the Operations Committee, to Mr. McDonald's committee. Thank you very much. Mr. McDonald.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to...
Yes, thank you.
Okay, first of all, as legal advisor, as the chairman correctly stated, for the Winnebago County Board, we are a non-home rule governing body. And what that means is that the county board is at the top of the food chain when it comes to governing Winnebago County. You are collectively the president of Winnebago County. The chairman serves, and his responsibilities are designated by the Winnebago County Board. You can enlarge those responsibilities, you can decrease those responsibilities. That remains with the county board, not with the state's attorney. In addition, as far as the agenda for the committee chairman, the committee chairmen are in charge of putting items on their agenda. Those items should not be removed without the committee chairman's authority. And any item going on that agenda is the responsibility of the committee chairman. Thank you.
Yes, the committee chairman put items on the committee, individual committee meeting agendas. I agree. Yes, thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? We've sent this item back to the Operations Committee. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quickly as well, the Operations Committee, we would like to reach out with the Economic Development, anybody else. We're looking to form a subcommittee for, to meet with Mr. Anderson and the Land Bank. So if committee chairs, if you could reach out to your people and see maybe if we can have 3 or so people that are willing to sit and we can have two-way discussion. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. Next item of business, Mr. Tassoni, the Public Works Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our Public Works Committee brings forth 3 resolutions this evening. The first would be item 19-014, and it's an ordinance establishing speed zones on Pecatonica Road from US 20, 1,000 feet south of the northern Pecatonica village boundary, and from the northern village boundary to 1,000 feet south. Basically, what it does is takes a 55-mile-an-hour zone down to 45 and 35. And I so move.
We got a motion by Mr. Tassoni on 19-014, the ordinance establishing speed zones on Pecatonica Road. May I have a second, please? There's several. Mr. Booker, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Webster. Item is now before the board. Any discussion by board members? Yes, yes, sir, Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. This stretch of road is in my district. The Winnebago County Highway Department has been in contact with me. They did complete a speed study with a recommendation that it be reduced to 45. It's also in the public interest, as I've received a couple of phone calls from residents along there. There are elderly residents, there are new families, there are pets. And with the Winnebago County Fair and 2 other large events at the county fairgrounds, which is Peck-Thing. I strongly encourage everyone to attend Peck-Thing. For people come from Milwaukee. His 55 is Mr. Tassoni.
Total cost, $2.4 million and some change. The county's cost is $1.1 million, with the other monies being for township and various other entities. I so move.
We got a motion by Mr. Tassoni on 19-015, resolution awarding bid for bulk rock salt. May I have a second, please? Mr. Girl, thank you very much. Item is now before the board. Any discussion by board members on this bid? Yes, sir, Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just don't understand the dynamics here. So we work with the townships on maintaining the roads, or it's not separated?
Mr. Tassoni.
Basically, the townships, the county handles the bid and the amounts that the townships are anticipating. There's an itemized on the bid spec or the bid pack that what the county or the townships are going to be purchasing for themselves. That amount comes up to roughly $1.3 million. That's their share. The county just does the purchasing on their behalf. Is that correct, Mr. Vanderwerf?
Joint
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, the other agencies involved in this pay for the salt that they need, but they're part of our bid process.
Some of it's for us and some of it's for them.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Any other follow-ups, Mr. Arena? Seeing none, are there any other questions by board members on this particular bid related to bulk rock salt? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Chairman. Next item on the list here is 19-016, and it is where am I at? It's an award of a bid for the 2019 Township Seal Coating Program, and this again is just, it's under the township's expense. Well, I guess it's a move first, Chairman. And,
okay.
Just a second.
Yes, we got a motion by Mr. Tassoni on 19016 resolution awarding bid for township seal coating. May I have a second, please? Mr. Grohl and Mr. Hoffman, thank you. Item is now before the board.
And I would just speak to it if I could, Chairman.
Yes, sir.
But this again, Mr. Arena and for others, this is just the county manager on the township's behalf, no cost to the county.
Any other questions? Yes, Mrs. Red.
Thank you, Chairman. It says countywide. So there will be some seal coating done in my district?
No, this is countywide based on the townships are within the county, not necessarily county roads. That would be done under the jurisdiction of the highway department itself. Would you like to speak to that, Mr. Vanderwerf?
Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, it's just on township roads countywide. The townships has selected the roads they wanted to do, and then we did the bid process for them. And just to explain a little bit further for the county board's edification, we have and we house MFT monies for the township by state statute. And so when they use MFT monies, we are required to go out to bid on their behalf and oversee the project so they follow all the rules and requirements.
Thank you very much. Any other follow-ups?
I have a
Yes,
follow-up.
Mrs. Red.
I think I need to be in touch with township, because I have some roads in my district that have been forgotten.
Yes, thank you very much, Mrs. Red. And maybe a follow-up with Mr. Vanderwerf just to discuss that item might be a good next step. Thank you very much. It's a fair question. Any other discussion by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Chairman.
Next item of business, Public Safety Committee, Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. Public Safety Committee has two items. Number one is ordinance. Ordinance amending Section 3032 of the Winnebago County Code to authorize the Winnebago County Sheriff to appoint a coordinator for ESDA, which is the Emergency Services Disaster Agency. This is co-sponsored with the Operations Committee, and it was unanimously approved by both committees, and I move for its adoption.
So it's in for a first reading, and I believe then this would be suspending the rules. Is this is in for the first read?
Yes.
Okay, so
Thank you.
your motion is to suspend the
suspend the
rules that would allow us to vote this evening. Got a motion by Mr. Booker to suspend the rules. That way we could then, in a separate vote, take action this evening. Can I have a second on the motion to suspend? Mr. Fellers, Mr. Billick, thank you very much. The motion to suspend is before the board. Any discussion only on whether or not to suspend the rules tonight? Seeing none, all those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? We've suspended the rules, and now I could take a motion from Mr. Booker.
Take motion to adopt the amended ordinance for the sheriff to appoint a ESDA coordinator.
Thank you very much. A motion by Mr. Booker on the ordinance amending Section 3032 of the county code to authorize the Winnebago County Sheriff to appoint a coordinator of ESDA. May I have a second on this motion? Mrs. Grohl, Mrs. Red, and Mr. Westcott. Item is now before the board. The ESDA item is before the board. Any discussion on this ordinance? Since this, yes, sir, Mr. Boomer.
This came up in our caucus. The previous ESDA owner, or coordinator was Scott Myers, right?
Yes.
So, since he retired, So now we're going to give it to the city of Rockford?
Well, this ordinance is just to authorize the sheriff.
Right, they both coexist though. So if are we paying the city of Rockford then?
Well, that'll also be covered on the next item, which is the resolution for the IGA, but if we can get that.
We could probably just clean this up so it's clear before you take the first vote, which will help you on your second one. I'll go to Madam State's Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a resolution that my office drafted after discussions with the sheriff, and this came up in the committee meeting, but for those of you who were not able to attend, by statute, the sheriff in the county is responsible for ESDA, the Emergency Service Disaster Team. And so without a resolution allowing the sheriff to appoint a coordinator to assist him in these responsibilities, that is the reason for the resolution. Just so that you know, this is the final draft of a couple of drafts. I actually had Charlotte in my office draft this with my input and also with input from IEMA at the state level. The first draft that we had originally received from the city, I had some concerns about, and so we had a phone conference with IEMA. IEMA also expressed concerns, but they did indicate that this was an agreement that the sheriff could enter and it would be legal as far as funding, because it is a county funding. The city of Rockford cannot have their own ESTA program, so they have to operate under the county. The funding comes to Winnebago County from the state. So that money goes to Winnebago County. Winnebago County has to fund this from the general fund, so the city cannot get the grant money from the state. In other words, the state reimburses the county for the program for a certain amount of dollars each year. That money will continue to come from the state to Winnebago County. So the funding for the coordinator has to come out of the general fund because the city of Rockford cannot directly receive that money from the state.
Thank you very much, and I have a follow-up by Carla.
I just want to clarify, we do receive grant funding, but it's not in the total amount that's going to be paid to the city. It didn't fund our total budget either when it was paid through the county as a county employee. But I just want that to be clear.
Thank you very much. Since this is a Sheriff Department item, is there anything you care to add, Mr. Karna? Okay, thank you. Did you have a follow-up on that, Mr. Boomer? Mr. Fellers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think this one works anymore. Mr. Boomer, I think the other point that came out of committee was that the reason why we're doing this with Rockford is that the Sheriff's Department and all of us agreed that the Rockford Fire Department was the group most capable of executing off of this, which is why we chose that route rather than keeping it the way it had been. Is that accurate, Mr. Booker?
No, I think Mr. Boomer's question has to do, is the confusion of, it was run by Deputy Chief Scott Myers, who has since resigned from the department, and now the sheriff will appoint an ESDA director. And how is that going to, what's going to happen with Myers' salary as compared to what we're getting from the state? And I see Chief Deputy Carner's hand up, and he can elaborate on that.
Mark?
This is a way to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of emergency service and emergency response. There are three benefits. Number one, this is more cost effective. The person that will be hired in this position, if the board approves, will be paid less than the person who preceded him or her. Number two, it's a way to increase resources. It's a force multiplier. This person will be tasked with developing networks and enhancing resources that are available for us to respond to emergencies. Number three, it's going to be a person who's a subject matter expert. Police officers, people in law enforcement aren't necessarily subject matter experts in emergency response. Typically, either the person has got a background in strictly emergency response or has got a firefighter background. firefighters from very early on are trained in emergency management, and that's indoctrinated in them throughout their careers. So we see this as a strong benefit, especially now when we're in it's very time sensitive because we're in the middle of storm season and tornado season. This has got to be done, and this is a way to improve emergency service responses to our citizens.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. Any other follow-ups? This first item is just authorizing the sheriff to appoint a coordinator for ESDA. That's the only action item before the board at this point. There's a second action item to follow. Any other questions specific to item 2, which is the authorizing the sheriff to appoint a coordinator for ESDA specifically? Yes, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to speak to the importance of this coordinator position. As you all know, I'm also a volunteer firefighter when I'm not here. It takes a special kind of emergency services nerd to really enjoy diving into the things that hopefully will never happen, but possibly could happen. It takes a unique individual who is passionate about those types of things. To be able to have one funded by the county, and if I understand it right, Rockford has their own as well. So to have two of those types of people in the same room together, they're going to grow off of each other, they're going to bounce ideas off each other. It's going to make us much more strong in the event we do have to use one of them. I strongly urge its support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. Any other questions by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. Item number 2 is a resolution. Resolution approving an intergovernmental agreement between the County of Winnebago and the City of Rockford to provide services of a coordinator for the Winnebago County Emergency Services Disaster Agency. And I move for its approval.
Got a motion by Mr. Booker on the resolution approving the IGA between the county and City of Rockford to provide services for coordinator of the ESDA services. May I have a second? Mr. Westcott, thank you. Mrs. Gorel. Item is now before the board. Any discussion by board members? Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a financial question. What is the grant amount that the state pays us for the position?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Is it anywhere near what we're going to be paying for the IGA?
No, but it wasn't near what we paid when it was part of the county budget either.
So there's some hidden cost in this for the county?
No hidden cost, no. It just isn't, I just wanted to make it clear that the grant doesn't fully fund the program, just so everyone was aware of that, whether it's with the city or the county. I just wanted to make that point clear.
So as a follow-up, so in other words, there's going to be nothing for IMR, for none of our liability is going to be going up every year because of this?
It just depends on what the cost is with the city. We've agreed that they will true up the cost at the end of every year, and then adjustment would be made upward or downward in the following fiscal year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia. Thank you, Carla, for the follow-up. Any other discussion by board members? Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just based on the conversation that we've had so far, I'll just admit confusion around this. If Rockford already has a person who sits in the seat, and this is funded deliberately by the government for some reason to the county and to the sheriff and not to the city, it just seems odd to me what we're doing. So I just put that on the table and say maybe at some point we could get an explanation as to, why are we doing this, and if the city has one, why are they getting a second one, and if the intention was to fund this through the county, through the sheriff, are we losing something in this transition? Thank you.
Would anybody like to speak to that item? I'll go to the chair of the committee, then a follow-up to Mr. McDonald. Mr. Booker.
Yeah, and I'll invite Mr. McDonald to chime in as well. But the sheriff can designate whoever he desires to as a coordinator of the ESDA. It could be someone within his department. It could be someone within the county. But at this point, it's going to he's selecting the person and persons most qualified, most well-trained, and it just happens to be with the city. There was, at the inception of this idea, there was some pushback from surrounding agencies, surrounding volunteer fire departments, that here we are giving the city of Rockford another lead in running our operations. Well, after it was all discussed with Chief Bergston and the sheriff and the sheriff's department, and myself as well, and Mr. McDonald was involved in that as well, it was determined, and we were convinced that the sheriff has selected the most qualified and best trained person that we have available in Winnebago County to run the emergency services. So that's the only reason it's going to the city of Rockford, is because they have the most or the best qualified person around. Mr. McDonald, can you elaborate?
Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chief Kerner, do we have somebody selected already, or is this position that we're hiring for?
No, it's a position we're gonna hire for.
Okay, that's what I understood.
When I say we, it's a partnership with the city of Rockford. Chief Bergston's gonna lead the charge on that, and the person's gonna become a city of Rockford employee, but subject to the consent and the approval of the sheriff. And they'll be also serving under the direction of the sheriff. As to Mr. Schultz's question, the city, as emergency services person, is responsible for emergency services within the city of Rockford. County, obviously the county. This is a way to combine into a partnership so that we're multiplying effectiveness through the relationships they develop, same training, same equipment, all that.
Thank you, Mr. Kerner.
Just,
yes, State's Attorney Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to add that the IEMA requirements for this position and the responsibilities on the Sheriff's Department is huge. And when we talked to IEMA, one of the things that they wanted to make clear in the agreement was that all of the detailed responsibilities and qualifications of whoever would serve in that position, that person had those qualifications. And when the sheriff and I discussed it, as Mr. Carner said, the sheriff looked at who is the most qualified person to help him with this responsibility that he's been tasked with. And if he does not pick the most qualified person, the responsibility lies with Winnebago County. So I just want you all to know that it's still the responsibility of Winnebago County. The sheriff by statute is that designated person, and he is trying to pick the most qualified individual that can help him fulfill those statutory duties. So that was the impetus behind this IGA with the city of Rockford.
Follow up, Mr. McDonald.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I was not finished, I apologize. The city of Rockford, as far as fire service goes, cares about the city of Rockford. I've been on fire scenes with them, and they're eager to get back to their city. They have very high call volume. They spend very little time outside of their city. And based on that, several chiefs in Winnebago County reached out to me, being a county board member, saying, hey, we cannot give this control to the city of Rockford because Rockford cares mostly about Rockford. That's why we have to make sure we get somebody that is looking after the rest of the county. After discussing with them what I had to talk with Chief Burson about, they're all okay with it now. They think this is a great plan, and they feel comfortable moving forward this way.
Thank you for the follow-up. Any other questions or comments? I know the discussion stalled out for a minute, and I appreciate people continuing the conversation to get to this point. Did you have a follow-up, or a question, Mr. Salgado?
Pretty much the state's attorney kind of addressed this, but, you know, I understand the whole, I voted yes on the first part of the resolution, or the ordinance, actually, because it's the sheriff's right to appoint whoever he wishes to. With that being said, I read the IGA and everything. It says the city will do the hiring, will take the initiative in finding the right candidate. So it does relinquish some of the responsibilities off the sheriff, which I'm okay with, having the best qualified, perfect. But once again, the question that I have, well, not really a question, is we're paying the salary of this individual plus the benefits. So that's kind of alarming where, not alarming, but just begs the question, like, it's a city employee, but we're paying, because of the grant money or whatever, that doesn't funnel through. So the question that I have is the liability aspect of it. Does it fall back on the Winnebago County or the city who's essentially liability if anything happens? I know he's a coordinator, on the East Emergency, but once again, as we've seen things happen, with employees, I just want to know who would be responsible for such liability. Would it be the county? Would it be the city? On that aspect of it, who would pick up the bill? So that's the question I have.
I'll turn to staff, or I'll turn to the state's attorney, whoever wants to take that.
I'll take that question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Delgado, this individual would remain an employee of the city of Rockford, therefore any liability would be with the city of Rockford. The sheriff is basically through this IGA contracting with the city of Rockford to provide those services under him.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Salgado. Any follow-up questions? Yes, Mrs. Gorham.
Thank you, Chairman. This is, you really have to look at the whole picture. This is not a Winnebago County, City of Rockford situation. This is a whole Winnebago County situation in case we have a huge disaster here. Can our small fire districts handle big disasters? Are they trained? Can they do this? This is an all-out effort for all of us. It's not the city, it's not the Winnebago County, it's not the small fire districts. It's all our responsibility. This is talking about big disasters. And if we have a tornado come through, or just even what we had on the river, if that had gotten worse, we all would have had to be in on it. And this is basically what it is. And the nice thing about the fire department of Rockford, they've all been trained in this, and they're bringing their training to our smaller fire districts. They will also bring the training after that to us who are county board members, because we're elected officials, so we know what also to do in case of a disaster. This is a whole county situation, having at the city of Rockford, who has had all the training in their fire department, not their police department, their fire department, on how to handle these disasters. So keep that in mind and keep the word disaster in the back of your mind. We have been very fortunate we haven't had these things happen, but who says tomorrow we aren't the ones that are going to have the disasters here? Keep that in mind, because that's what this is about. It's not a city issue, it's not a county issue. We just want to all be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Gorham. Any other questions? I see a couple hands popped up, but I'll go to the chairman of the committee, Mr. Booker, first, and then two board members.
Thank you, Chairman. And Ms. Gorham did remind me of there is a program put on locally, 4 or 5 hour program, and I strongly recommend county board members attend this training session. It allows you to see what role you have as a county board member should there be a plane crash, a tornado, a flood. But it brings you up to date, up to speed on what responsibilities, what's expected out of us as county board members. Keith McDonald also has further information on that as well. He's attended it, I've attended it, so I encourage, it's just what is it, a 4-hour program, Mr. McDonald? I took the 40-hour class, sir.
Oh, I stand corrected. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. He's much more qualified than the rest of us. And I've been involved in the FEMA Incident Command Center myself, so, but it's, you can see us later if you're interested in something like that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Booker. I believe Mr. Rena had his hand up, and then Mr. Tassoni. Mr. Rena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just so that I understand, in Section 4, responsibility of the city, C, it says, or I'm sorry, B, the coordinator will commit at least 50% of his or her full-time work week to emergency management duties under this agreement. So what are they doing the other 50% of their time? I was under the impression that was all they were doing. Excuse me. Maybe Mr. Carner can answer that?
Well, so gotta work it out, but that's going to mean training, network development, all of that.
But they're working full-time on our behalf, on the work of this office?
Right.
Okay, I think that's odd wording for, what you're describing his duties will be. But I guess the state's attorney's comfortable with how this is written. You guys created this? Section 4, responsibilities of the city, item B.
Okay, so that is, if I may, Mr. Chairman, that is taken directly from the code of the Illinois statute, if you see that section after that.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we did when we spoke to IEMA to make sure that the IGA would be in compliance with IEMA requirements, that's taken directly from the IEMA statute, and that's why it's worded that way.
I see. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. If Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for my own curiosity, and maybe some others, just curious of what the grant is, when you can find that information out and email it to us. How much is the actual grant, and what's the difference, the gap that the county has to come up with?
Thank you. So we'll get that information on the grant out and acknowledge the gap as well. Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. I believe I had, or Mrs. Squirrel.
Actually, thank you. It sounds like all we are is a pass-through for the grant. It's passed through us to the city because that's the way it's designed to be. And we have a lot of pass-through grants that we have to give to different entities because we are the county. I'm sure what the gap is probably our share of our own contribution to that additional grant. So it's nice to know, but in the long term, we have really chewed this up enough, and we need to go on to something else. Thank you.
Lots of chewing. Yes. Any other questions, comments, concerns related to this partnership on this IGA? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you for a good discussion. Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. To wrap up, unfortunately, I have to wrap up on a sad note. Senior Deputy Shelley Abadi served Winnebago County from 1990 to 3 years ago. She served 26 years on the Winnebago County Sheriff's Department, retiring as a senior deputy. A week before her retirement, she went in for a physical and discovered she had cancer. 3 days ago, she lost her battle. She had a she fought valiantly. She came out of it at one point and was in remission, and she enjoyed retirement for maybe a year out of her time. But Shelley was a good cop. I worked with her on the west side of Winnebago County in the southeast, but she spent a lot of time in McChesney Park. Shelley had a big heart. She was one of those deputies that, whether it was a domestic violence situation or a traffic accident, Shelley was one that would go back 2 or 3 days later and say, hey, how's things going here? How's the kids? How's things working out? Shelley was that type of cop, but she could also stand her ground. I remember one call that she was calling for backup, and I was hustling as quick as I could to get there, and she was face to face with the guy, 6'3", and they were nose to nose, and I got there, and we got the guy into custody without any further incident, and Shelley said, boy, Booker, am I glad to see you here. She said, I think I was about to get my tail kicked. But she stood up to him, and she had a big heart, and she was an asset to Winnebago County Sheriff's Department. The family has requested private services, so any cards of sympathy or flowers sent to the Sheriff's Department, and we'll see to it that her family gets it. She leaves behind a husband and a grown son in college, so they'll be just fine. Shelley made sure that the boys were going to be fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very, very well said. Thank you, Mr. Booker. Our next item of business, Personnel Policy Committee, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no report this evening, but I would like to make a comment. Thank you for allowing me to go ahead and put that ordinance back on the agenda for next county board meeting for a first reading. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of spirited talk here tonight, reference what we can and what we can't do. Just so everybody's aware, the reason we're going to put that back on and move forward with it is because I think the snafu about the personnel issue was basically unfounded. Everything is well and alive. We're going to move forward with that. We also are going to be addressing a line of succession. I've talked with the state's attorney's office about that. We also are going to discuss an evaluation form for the administrator, which we will be bringing up in committee hopefully next week. So once again, thank you for that opportunity to address the board. We will be putting that ordinance back on the agenda next week.
Just to follow up on the evaluation form, who's helping work that up? Mr. Fiducia.
I spoke with the state's attorney, referenced that, and we're determining how we're going to do it the best way. Hopefully we're going to be looking at 2 other counties that we're going to model ourselves after the way they do it. And we'll be doing more spirited discussion on this, I'm sure, but this is just a preliminary investigation, what we're doing, but we're planning to move forward with this.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that is I would just encourage you to consider involving the HR director in HR-related evaluations. If we don't involve the HR department in HR issues, then it becomes difficult to evaluate the HR department in terms of how things are going. So I just encourage you to consider that in your process.
I definitely will. As just so you're aware, there are a couple issues that we're having right now, but we hope to have those things resolved by next board meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fiducia. Next item of business, Finance Committee, Mr. Salgado.
Yes, there's nothing on the agenda to be voted on today, but however, next Thursday, I believe we're meeting with the clerk's office to talk about clerk fees. That's coming down the pipeline. They have a July 1st deadline, so we'll talk about that. There's a couple things that I want to talk to you about, but I will bring this up at the Finance Committee. One is the RFQ process for, obviously, the delinquent tax program that we're looking at. The other item is I'm looking to work with economic development on the host fees, potentially using some of those funds for investments as well with the revolving loan that Mr. Dornbush has kind of drafted. So we'll talk about those things, but I just wanted to bring that up that next Thursday we'll probably have a meeting on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Any unfinished business by board members? Under new business, we have a number of items, 7 appointments that laid over from the last meeting. I'll just ask, is there any, before we take a vote, is there any particular item you'd like pulled out? Any board member want to pull out any item to have a separate vote on it? If not, we will take all 7 together. Seeing none, I'm going to ask for a motion to approve items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. I'll read them in very quickly. The reappointment of Todd Scott, North Park Water District, the reappointment of Dale James, North Park Water District, reappointment Patricia Rogers, Harlem Cemetery Association, reappointment Thomas Taylor, Harlem Cemetery Association, reappointment Ray Rogers, also to the Harlem Cemetery Association, and also the reappointment of Terry Johnson to the same association. Reappointment of Gregory Gill, Northwest Fire Protection District in McChesney. May I have a motion on that? May I have a motion, Mr. Kelly? May I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Neighbors and Mrs. Gorel. All 7 are now before the board for consideration. Any discussion or question on the 7 appointments before the board? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Motion passes. We've reappointed all 7. Thank you very much for your consideration on that. At the request of the state's attorney, and I'm going to ask for a closed session related to litigation when an appropriate action affecting or on behalf of the particular public body has been filed and is pending before a court or administrative tribunal, or when the public body finds that an action is probable or imminent, in which case the basis for the finding shall be recorded and entered into the minutes of the closed session meeting. May I please have a motion to go to closed session? I got a motion by Mrs. Grohl, second by Mrs. Crosby. All those in favor of going to closed session signify by saying aye. Are there any opposed? We'll go to closed session in about 2 minutes. Mr.
Did you indicate no action was taken?
Yes.
Okay.
I didn't give Paul this.
Here, I'll take it.
Thank you.
So, yeah, go ahead and, start your